And he said, "You don't have any equipment, you don't have any people. Why would I hire you to do this job?" And I said, "Because if you hire me, you won't have to lay awake at night and worry about it because that's going to be my job." That's what sold him.
Yeah.
I
He
mean,
gave you a
they hired
shot.
me to do the job. I was 28 years old. He knew that I was going to make sure. If the job didn't fail, it certainly wasn't going to be because of me. We were going to push it. I think that mindset, we're all going to win together. That mindset is, to me, critical for us. If we sold to a couple people inside the company, earthwork is such a capital intensive business. It's hard for employees in the business to have enough capital to support the surety bonding requirements, the banking, all that business. So that's not a great option. You can just shut it down and have an auction, right? And that doesn't help anybody. Probably lose money on your jobs is when you tell your employees you're going to shut down. So they start looking for jobs elsewhere, right? That's not a good option. The one thing that really, for me, gave us the best opportunity to provide a really good continuum of our management and culture, and add in that it benefits the employees, add in the tax efficiency of an ESOP really helps to build capital in the business. So ESOPs don't pay taxes, not like an S or a C Corp do. So when I looked at all those things, it was kind of like, okay, there's really only one way to do this, and that's the ESOP.
Welcome, everybody, to the next episode of the Construction MF'ers podcast. I am Scott Pieper, CEO and founder of Mobilization Funding. And today I'm going to bring you a guest who has 475 employees. Their company was founded in 1926. The company has part of his name on it. Herb Sargent. You are the CEO of Sargent. How are you?
Well, thanks for inviting me on. I've been listening to a lot of your podcasts and hope I can help hold up the standard here. You got some great guests and great information for folks.
Well, thank you, man. And you know what? I think you have great information too. I've been watching and following you on LinkedIn for quite some time. We have lots of mutual friends in and
Yeah.
around the industry on LinkedIn. But you know what? And I was going to save this for the intro, but I wanted to bring you on because I wanted to tell you this like while I'm talking to you. I just think your perspective of what you can offer people with the amount of time you've been in business at your very young age and starting a business, merging with businesses, having, growing from a small number of employees to 475 employees. You're employee owned. You also have bank lines of credit. You also have surety relationships. You've
Mm.
worked in government contracting. You've worked with Department of Transportation, bonding. You really have seen a lot. And what I want to do is be able to get inside your brain and talk and ask the questions that a lot of people ask or want to ask. They ask us, or they really would like to ask people in the business, but they don't get a chance to, or they're afraid to, or they make them nervous. And so that's what I'm really looking forward to tackling today a little bit too.
Well, thank you. I don't know how I shoehorned a 45-year career into a 30-year life, but it's working for me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, you started when you were one, man. That's all. You just learned fast. You're a
Yeah,
prodigy.
it's been I like to say I've got a lot of chips in my windshield. And so if I can share how to navigate the traffic of business construction world, and help people avoid those same chips in the windshield, I'm glad to do that.
Well, one of the things I think is really cool that you do, and I'll jump right into this first, maybe not, it wasn't in my exact order of going through, but you know, someone like yourself in the construction space that's been through this much at your very young age with 45 years of experience and all those chips in the windshield, they're not very active typically in social media. They're not really out front of the curve. They're not showing things and promoting. It's not the norm. There's plenty of people doing. I'm not saying you're the only one, but it's not the norm.
Yeah.
Talk maybe a little bit about why or what made you start to use social media, compelled you to put yourself out there, put your business out there. You're very open and sharing not only your successes, but your failures. And and you can tell it's genuine because people have gravitated to you. What made you do that?
Well, we not much of a Facebook or Instagram guy, but when I kind of stumbled into LinkedIn, I guess somebody invited me to it, and I got it, and it was like, okay, so this is the platform where people share information, good, bad, and ugly about business. And man, we've had a lot of successes. We've also survived a lot of failures. And I will say, for me, I was in survival mode for a good part of my career when I started in business. And when I say survival mode, it's like you never really have the right. I like to talk in terms of aeronautics. You're never really flying at the right altitude, so that if things go wrong, you've got a long landing zone to hit. And so um, when I found that space on LinkedIn, it just became a place that I felt, number one, we could celebrate some of our milestones that we hit as a company and celebrate the wins that we have in the field, but also kind of compelled to say, there's a lot of people in business now that have come into business since the Great Recession, right? And I personally have lived through downturns in the early 80s, the early 90s, 2000, 2008. So four downturns. And I just think that's too bad for somebody to die with that, with all that information, that experience. So I try to share where things got knobby for me and for our company, um, in hopes that it may help somebody, see a perspective that could alter their own future.
Is there one or two things in that light? Is there one or two things in particular that you wish, or your hope, I should say, is, hey, if anyone's listening or paying attention, that's post recession, right? And they've come into the business, you said, man, if they're following you, there's just one or two nuggets you just wish if you could just program into their brain, you would program in.
It would be resilience. It would be define what resilience means to you, and then to your organization or to you personally. I think for me, it's hard to be resilient as a company if the leaders aren't individually, personally resilient also. So I would say find your resilience and what that means. And I talk about, as I mentioned, flying at 30,000 feet. If we have an economic downturn, we will, by the way, you know that. When we have an economic downturn, uh, if we're flying higher, if we've got margins of safety in areas in our business development, in our uh, cash flow, in our uh, bonding relationships, banking relationships, employee relationships. If we've got margin of safety and all that, then we can be pretty resilient. So instead of flying at say 1,000 feet, and when the power goes out in your plane, you've got about a 3 square mile area to land. If you're at 30,000 feet, you're much more resilient. You've got, I can't remember the numbers, like 120 square miles or maybe more than that, but just a lot. If you can gain altitude in terms of how resilient your company is, then that's the thing that I think I'd like to see people take from me.
I agree with you on that. I think there's a lot of ways to phrase it. I love that you said resilience, because that's really what it is. And to get resilient, you have to also have grit and perseverance and a desire that you won't quit, And I think every construction contractor I talk to typically would like to grow. Some want to grow into this huge business, but some just want to grow to the next spot, right? Whatever growth is defined as. But it takes that resilience to get there. And how you build that resilience is the part that I think a lot of folks don't want to hear and don't like.
Yeah.
And I'm going to ask you about some of those, but it comes through the pain. You get resilient by dealing with really hard times.
Well, I mean, you literally, I mean, I think when you're starting a business, you're going in a business, and I did 30 years ago, a little over 30 years ago, you have to deny yourself some things. You have to make sacrifices, and that's both at the personal level and at the business level. For instance, I mean, one example, I always wanted a shop. Like when I started businesses, I need a shop, but I couldn't see how I could afford a shop or how it would return money to me. So I literally built a building that was I measured a motor grader that we owned for length, and width, and an excavator we owned for height, and that's how big the shop was. Um, and I always wanted more, but I just never could make myself pull the trigger on that. So it's understanding what delivers bottom line results to you and what doesn't. And then every time you focus on the bottom line results, to me, that's when you can begin to gain more altitude in your corporate uh, flight path.
Yeah, did somebody give that guidance to you? Because that's not common. That's not a common thought process. Was that good
I
advice?
I would have to say, my dad was a good influence, my grandfather too, when I started business. But for me, I never wanted to be uncomfortable in that way, like I'm overextended. Now, I
Mhm.
eventually did get overextended in a couple ways, but I didn't want to be overextended in terms of what I guess the part coming from the business that I had, my grandfather's business. I saw a lot of ways that money was spent that I felt like wasn't necessarily accretive to the bottom line or necessarily focused on winning in the field. And so I was kind of determined not to have that.
Yeah, as a finance guy, what that's called is build your balance sheet. Everyone's like, oh, what does
Yeah,
that
right.
mean? Right. Building your balance sheet is exactly, in practical terms, what you just mentioned. You
Yeah,
do the
my first
work.
balance sheet had the biggest number was I think $9,680, and that was what the company was capitalized with. So it was all zeros besides equity 9,680. So building a balance sheet from there and needing a bond within about 3 months of starting, that put me on a road to really really steep education in terms of what it takes to really deal with all aspects of the business. Because in the previous business I was in, I was one of 300 people in the business, and if we needed a bond, we just requested a bond from the bonding company, and they sent a bond over because we've been in business for 80 years. Starting out, it's like, okay, I need a bond, and they're well. I can remember is that we're gonna have to sit down and have a conversation first before we send you a bond. I thought it was just something you got
Yeah.
because you asked for it.
The concept of delayed gratification, which is what you're talking about, is
Yeah,
really a principle of every business owner should need to know. If there's a book and a script, and right next to resilience and perseverance, there was the term delayed gratification, and you were just exposed to those terms, you'd have a lot of people avoid a lot of pain and be more successful faster.
yeah, I think that's right, and I think when we start in business, when I started in business, I just wanted to make a living. That's what I wanted to do. And I didn't have any grand desire on getting bigger or buying the old family business back. Or it was just like, I think I know how to build. And so I think I can go into business. And I think that's the way a lot of people go into business. And that's great. But understanding now, and I didn't understand as well as I wish I did back then, hence my wanting to share this. Um, Understanding how these different pieces, banking, bonding, cash flow, balance sheet, income statements, cash flow statements, how all these things work together and how they're driven by really your pricing and B, your execution. In some ways, it's a really simple business. Either you're not getting paid enough, or you're not executing.
Oh, yeah, or both.
Right.
So you mentioned bonding a few times, and I really think that's a hot topic. It's something that's required in many instances in businesses. Sometimes even private jobs require bonding, or
Yeah.
if you're willing to put up a bond, that could be a separator. But with bonding, there's difficulty in getting that. There takes a lot of discipline in terms of the financial structures, but it's also a risk. You talk about bonding a lot and what's taken. And I thought, before we started this, you had some great perspective on bonding. Can
Yeah.
you kind of give your overview of that? And let's dive into that topic a little bit.
Well, I think the first thing we have to understand about bonding that I didn't really appreciate is that people are, in effect, they're saying for really just a few $1,000s on, let's say $500,000 job, they're saying, I've got your back. If you fail, I'll step in and finish this job and it'll be on my dime. That's a lot of risk, and especially if you're new in the business, it's a lot of risk to have somebody come in and say, if you don't make it, it's okay, we'll cover for you. Now, they probably will tie you up personally in some ways and want you to sign over your house, car, kids, everything else. But understanding that what they're doing is they're protecting the owner. It's an insurance product. They're protecting the owner against your failure. And a lot of companies fail. So what they want to see, the bonding company, is they want to know that you're not going to fail. They want to know what their risk is too. So, they start looking at balance sheets and they start looking at a lot of other things, like what's your succession plan? If you get run over by a red truck, who's going to take this over? How's this going to wrap up? I mean, there's just so many things that they are interested in, ought to be interested in, when they sign their name on to, in effect, insure against your failure. So, just those are a lot of things I didn't really appreciate. And I had a guy call me, a friend, about a year ago, and he had made an acquisition, and now he needed a bond, but the way his acquisition was booked was really suboptimal to his balance sheet. And so the bonding company was giving him a hard time. And I said, "Well, when's the last time you met him?" He said, "Well, I've never met him. I've just met the agent." And I said, "Okay, this is time. You're getting to be a big enough contractor where you need to have a relationship with the bonding company, the underwriter themselves, not the agent. So you need to ask for that meeting with the bonding company. And I think the sooner we start that in business, the better off we're going to be. And I mean, it's been a lot of iterations of what we've given the bonding company over the years. And we're always upfront. Like, you don't try to hide anything. That we've gotten to the point where we know what they want to see, and we even dig deeper ourselves to try to figure out what more information we can give them to make them comfortable with the risk they're taking with us.
Yeah, you make a great point there. Getting to, and now you're not always able going to get to the underwriter or the decision maker, but one of the concepts that you just described, I talk a lot about it internally in our organization, but I've in my past life, but with a lot of customers, is you must speak to the decision maker, or you must be speaking to the next closest person the
Yeah,
decision maker trusts, because no one is going to articulate your business, what you're doing, as well as you do. They shouldn't anyway. And to grab like an agent, for example, which is, it's in the industry, it's required. You're going to need an agent, but for that, you got, at the end of the day, that agent has to go sell your story as
right.
well or better than you do in order to convince them. And so at some point you have to make sure that you have a great relationship with your agent, and then you also have a great relationship with that underwriter, and you build that system in talk, and that talk is communicating in one way or the other, so you can really make sure you expand.
Yeah. So this individual that called me that day, he said, "Well, we just started, with our insurance agent, who was, I'm not going to say Allstate, but some, just kind of a general insurance company, not focused on the construction business." And so they were the ones that were writing their business. And then when it was, they needed a bond, they just went, "Well, okay, we can have a bond." But this agent they have at the insurance company doesn't know the construction business, doesn't know how to portray what's in the balance sheet, or, synthesize that information for the benefit of the bonding company. So there's just such a holiday in that situation, that I think you need to deal with to me, a bonding agent that knows the construction business, not just your everyday insurance agent that's swinging over into the bonding world for this one thing.
Yeah.
So that relationship you mentioned is really important. And then that person, if they're in the right, to me, if they're in the right frame of mind, and they run the business the right way, they will want you to create a relationship back and forth with the bonding company, with the actual company. And then they want to stay in the communication stream always, but they want, like, our agents have always wanted us to meet directly with the bonding company. And I think part of that is they want them to have face to face comfort with who we are and what we say, how we act. They really, a lot of it boils down to character when it comes down to bonding.
There's a lot of similarities between lending, your banking relationship, and bonding. Um, and I think you've nailed a few of those. Let me ask you this. What role does your CPA play in the bonding process?
So the CPA, not so much. We have a really strong CFO who actually was our CPA. So back in the early days, I had to rely on them to put together my financial statements in a way that I could read them and then present them to the bonding company and the bank. So I'd spend some time sitting with the CPA and saying, okay, what does this mean? Tell me what stands out to you. If you were taking a risk on me, what in here would stand out to you? So anymore, we don't rely on the CPA as much, but back in my early days, yes, CPA was crucial to me. And also, again, if you've got the right agent that can read the balance sheets and the income statements and the cash flow statements, they ask the tough questions too. So that when you do go in front of the bonding company, I say it like you're going in front of a judge. I mean, usually it's over lunch or a meeting, but the CPA and those agents, I think, have a really important aspect in your business, because I'm not suggesting they fudge numbers, but they can show things in a way that makes sense in the construction world.
That's right. You transitioning a little bit out of the bonding world to you, but probably going to be related anyway. You mentioned price and performance as two key factors, and you talked about that as related to, creating profitability and creating margin and retained earnings. Talk a little bit about what role you think performance plays in the world of being a successful construction contractor, long-term, building resilience, bonding, and of course, price matters, but where does performance fit in?
So we try to look at it in terms, we call it execution. So, and for us, that's safely executing with quality. So the three stools to it. So it's safely executing, safely and quality productivity. So the three stools to what we think it boils down to. So we're in a competitive business, like it or not, and many of us are in a low bid environment. So we can't ignore competition, right? We just have to embrace it, really. And the way we talk a lot is and I heard this from my grandfather and my father is your competition is not going to let you get too far out of shape, or else you're already too far out of shape. So focusing on that field accountability at the lowest levels to us is really important. And somebody posted on LinkedIn, like, we look at your organization, like, take your org chart and turn it upside down. And now the lowest people that were typically on the chart are on the top, and what's leaking from them? What are they leaking down on the next layer and the next layer and the next layer? And so we've really embraced that idea. So we need, like, our field foremen need to, if they're leaking on us, we need them to mend their buckets, whatever that means. And so we're here to say, you need to mend your bucket, and here's what it's going to take, because you're leaking too much onto the next guy below you and the next guy below him. So really focused on that field foreman, because they're the ones where the safety and the productivity and the quality take place. It doesn't matter how cheap or expensive you are, but if you're not getting the right price, if you're bidding too cheap, great execution won't win. Mm-hmm. It'll make you feel good that you got a job done early, and I know you talk a lot about profitability, and if you're not bidding at the right price, if you're not understanding the market, it's a problem. And I'll be honest, through 2013, 10 to 13, 14, we didn't do a lot of people investment or recruiting. And when 15, 16 started to come back, the market came roaring back, and suddenly we didn't have enough people to take care of all the work we could get. And our execution suffered as a result. And we were we were actually bidding with higher margins, but bringing home lower margins. So it doesn't matter if you're not executing, it doesn't matter how high your margins are, you're still gonna bleed some of that off. If you are executing and you don't bid enough, you're still not gonna have enough money if you don't have enough margin on your work. So
Yeah.
the whole execution piece that ought to be the basis of the business. And
Yep.
then, what's the overhead? What are the other costs you have to cover? For us, there's a lot of ESOP costs that we have to cover. So what are those costs we have to cover? And then, markup on top of that for profit. And, if there are contingencies, you got to have some of that in there too.
We talk about it all the time, and I spend a ton of time talking about performance is the most important thing. Lead with that first. And one concept I think is important is a lot of folks, when I say that, they're like, yes, Scott, but if I don't bid it right, I'm not going to win the job. And I'm not saying performance is the only thing. I'm saying it's mandatory requirement. You can bid all the right prices, not execute, not perform. You're not going to get another job. And you can be the best performer with a better, maybe not in a low bid situation, but or rip and reward type scenario,
Yeah.
but you could be the best performer and not be the lowest price and win more jobs than anyone else. That's possible because people care about execution.
That can happen. And we talk to people and we do surveys about every 3 years of our customers and what are the most important things to you? And it's safety, quality, schedule, and price is usually like the fourth most important thing.
Mhm.
But I will tell you this, when it comes time to actually negotiate a job, price all of a sudden rises up to the top.
It definitely does.
Not with everyone, but it does come to the top, and it's hard to sell. There's a different value between what we sell and what others sell. Another thing about bidding work, and I remember in the late '90s, I really needed a job. I felt like I have to have this job, and my grandfather was riding with me, and I said, I got to have this job, talking about a particular job. And he said, don't ever tell yourself that. And I said, well, I mean, I got to put people to work. He said, no, let me tell you this. I said that to myself one time. And I'm going to say it's like the 1950s. He said, I said that I need to do this. I got to have this job to put people to work and keep the iron busy. And I took the job, did the job, and I never got paid. So how bad did I need that job? And I survived anyways.
Right.
So,
Or worse, you don't end up surviving. And what you took to keep you surviving is the reason you end up not surviving. That's the
right.
even worse part. One of the
So,
concepts I think is hard for folks to understand in business and in construction in particular, and a lot of it stems from the fact that everybody that gets into construction is some type of technician. Typically, you know the trade of some kind. You're not necessarily graduated out of finance school and said I'm going to go open up a masonry contracting business or earthwork.
right.
It's not the case. So that's what I mean by that. But what happens is, and I think this is a really interesting concept that is not forward presenting all the time. If you and I each own equal businesses that do the same exact work, and we're in the same area and we bid the same exact job, and we both bid the same price, it doesn't mean that I have the same margin and profit that you have.
Right.
How I execute a job and my cost structure can be vastly different. I may have a $2 million bid and job in, and so do you. And I might be at a 25% margin and you might be at a 12. And someone would be like, well, that's crazy. That's impossible. And the reality is you only know the way you bid unless you know how other people bid, and my concept, maybe I have service lines of business. My overhead is offloaded on different places. There's so many different financial things in a business that if you're not aware of them, you just have to know that two different businesses bidding the same price doesn't mean that someone's doing it at a low margin just because they won and it's lower than yours. It's not the case.
I mean, in our business, an equipment intensive business, that has such a huge impact on our numbers, on our costs and our bids and all that business versus let's say a mason or a drywall manufacturer or somebody like that that's more labor intensive, a drywall hanger rather, more labor intensive. our equipment can have such a huge impact. And the way I depreciate my equipment from a real economic standpoint can have a tremendous impact on what my actual hourly costs are for those pieces of equipment versus what the next guy might. So it's important. Or if one guy might rent all his equipment, so that's a cost, right? I mean, it's a built cost. The guy might rent a lot of equipment where the other guy might own some, and his ownership costs are lower. So also you mentioned overhead. Some people may allocate project managers to the field. Some may allocate them right to overhead. So that could be a big number of a few percent right there just in margin. And then how people look at potential upsets in the bid. If again in the earthwork world, if there's a lot of rock on a job that we don't have enough information of, then we've got to assess that risk and address it somehow. And we may choose to address that in a contingency item versus that in the actual bid item. So a lot of different ways to look at jobs, and as you said, can be vastly different margins.
Yeah, bidding is an art, you know, it's definitely an art sometimes. How you go about bidding and then how you take that bid and also design your schedule of values is also an art. And like
Oh yeah,
figuring those two things out while you have performance and execution at the top of your mind alongside price. I mean, that's really where all the juice is. Like, and you just hit two things, contingencies, putting those things in it, how you're going to frame up your bid, but also change orders, and like, how do
yeah,
you account for those? Do you do the work? Do you put stuff in your terms and conditions about how you're going to handle change orders so it's upfront? Things that if you try to negotiate change order when you have a change order, it's vastly different than saying, hey, this is a change order, and per my contract, here's exactly how I'm going to charge for it. Like
yeah,
now you're only arguing or talking about, is it a change order or not? There's no argument about how
yeah.
you're going to price for it because everyone agreed in the terms.
And I would say most contracts don't address the change order um, makeup that much. At least that's been my experience. And the other thing about change orders is they quite often don't come up until it's like all of a sudden, boom, we see something. We're doing work and we see something, and we say we've got a change in conditions here, or a change in the way we're approaching it, or the owner, the general contractor wants to change something, and we say, okay, well that's different from what we bid, so we need a change order, and it's quite often we don't get the change order until the work is done. I know you don't want to hear that,
No, it's true. No, I mean, you
but
just what I see people say, well, like Scott, I would say, well, you shouldn't do change orders till you have a change order. And they say, well, I can't do that. It's not possible. And then I say, okay, cool, no problem. Well, then you need to make sure you are taking the appropriate
yeah,
risk. You're taking a risk. And so you need to make sure in your bidding process, you have contingencies, you have ways you've mitigated that risk so that you're comfortable with it.
yeah,
Things like when it is a change order, I have my pricing in there. Like you said, most contracts don't address change orders in them. Okay, cool. But it doesn't mean you shouldn't. It's probably pretty easy to negotiate how you're going to charge for a change order at the beginning of a job when you're sitting down there negotiating your contract because there's no change order. You're like, if it's
yeah,
reasonable, they probably say, sure, put it in there. But fast forward 8 months later, projects over budget, under budget, out of line, who knows? It's going to be a totally different conversation around pricing a change order when money's on the line and you don't know if it's where the project is, And so,
it's really important just to be boom right up front. Like as soon as we see problems, we try to be solutions based, and so when we see an issue, we try to like catch it way ahead of time, and that's one of the things that we're known for. Is like we don't come in at the 11th hour and say this is a problem, we need to address it. We try to do everything we can to see these issues ahead of time and bring them up at the pre-construction meeting so that we've got most of these things ironed out well ahead of time. If there's going to be more rock, if there's less rock, or a difference in sequence or that sort of thing, try to address that up front and be there with, okay, here's the problem, here's three potential solutions. And it's the reception of those conversations is dramatically better than walking in and say, hey, we got problems.
You owe me money.
Yeah.
This is a change order. Yeah.
And that's what every GC wants to hear, that, right? We got problems, you owe me money.
Yeah. And there's like their first thought is gonna be like, oh boy, here it comes. But
Right.
if you're like, here's a problem, here's how we're gonna solve it. Here's two different options for you. These are the costs. This is the good with this one, the bad with that one, and vice versa for each one. Totally different conversation. It takes more work on your part, more preparation on your part, more effort on your part, but a lot better result.
So a lot of times, if we bring them up months ahead of time, we can say that we see this coming. Here's a way we can mitigate this into a no cost change. That for us, that's a win.
That's a win. Yeah, oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
like we don't approach projects, and I know some people do. Like, okay, we're going to do a $2 million job, and we're going to pick up 15% in change orders. We don't approach them that way. For us, if everything goes our way, we can mitigate costs. We can work with them and mitigate the costs, and come out of there with the same contract we signed at the beginning, and have a few $0 change orders that we're both happy with. And
Yeah.
so the whole point is, what we want to do is deploy people into the field that aren't backed into a corner on day one. So they're deployed into the field with a execution spirit that they're going to win, and win for the owner too, the
Yeah.
GC.
When you build a reputation of doing that also, Herb, it's vastly different conversation when you do need to charge for a change order.
Yeah.
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 Like, you know,
When you go to them and say, this is real, we told you about this 3 months ago, and now it's a real thing, and we're going to have to sit down and work this out.
yeah.
And, or we told you a month ago, whatever, the sooner you can get these things on the radar, the much better off you are.
So I want to switch gears on you a little bit and change topics up. Most business owners think one day about maybe selling their business, and there's lots of different options. And you mentioned that you guys are employee owned and in ESOP.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that? A lot of folks may not know what an ESOP is. They may
Sure.
not know that it's an option for succession planning, or a way
Yeah.
for a founder to capitalize on their hard work and also benefit the employees. Maybe you can offer a little suggestions on you guys have been ESOP for quite some time now, and some of the benefits and thoughts and what it is.
Yeah, so we've been ESOP for 11 years now, and I've got a letter here on my desk. Actually, I wrote in 2008 to the president of FMI. Do you know who they are?
No.
So FMI is a construction consulting company, and they're nationwide, and I'm involved in a peer group with them. And so I had written this letter. This is right after we bought my grandfather's company. And I say right after, 2 or 3 years after. So I'm about 45 years old, and I've got 2 kids, and it's pretty clear they don't want to be in the business. And I've got 400 employees at the time. And I'm like, okay, so I'm 45. I got to figure this out. And for me, if there's one thing I could tell people, you can't get started early enough. You can't get started thinking about this early enough. So, I said, we can buy this company. It's going to be a great thing. Marrying these 2 companies together, we can do a lot more work and have a lot more benefit to people. But someday I've got to get out, right? Someday this ends. And my dad, my uncle had sold the family business back in the 1980s, and that did not go well. It went. In fact, I stayed for 2 or 3 years after that and left. So I started looking at what's my exit, and that's only part of it. I started looking like what's my exit, but also what's our succession plan for the business. So it's 2 things that can be the same, but if you look at them in isolation, they don't necessarily work for the benefit of the company and the ongoing employees. So if I just said, what's my exit plan, we could sell out again, and the company goes on, but there's no stability to the culture we built and all that business. That could go away. If we sold to a couple people inside the company, earthwork is such a capital intensive business. It's hard for for employees in the business to have enough capital to support the surety bonding requirements, the banking, all that business. So that's not a great option. You can just shut it down and have an auction, right? And that doesn't help anybody. You probably lose money on your jobs as when you tell your employees you're going to shut down, so they start looking for jobs for work elsewhere, right? That's not a good option. And so the one thing that really for me gave us the best opportunity to provide a, a really good continuum of our management and culture, and add in that it benefits the employees, add in the tax efficiency of an ESOP, really really helps to build capital in the business. So ESOPs don't pay taxes, not like an S or a C corp do. So when I looked at all those things, it was kind of like, okay, there's really only one way to do this, and that's the ESOP. So I went on a few missions to try to get it, figure out if it was a viable option for me. And it took a while for me to find the right person to make it happen. But in 2013, 5 years after I'd written that letter to FMI, 2013, we became employee owned. And you asked about the benefits. Um, to start with, when we met with our employee owners the first day, when I said, okay, I'm not giving you the company, I'm selling you the company. And you got to look at it like maybe it's an apartment building and you're all employees for the apartment complex and it's worth $1 million, and I'm letting you borrow the $1 million. So there's no equity right now. We left a little bit of cash in there, so there was some equity, but the initial stock price was about $1 a share. And um, I said, to everyone here, the average person in this room, we had all the employees in the room. In year one, your average value is, if everything goes well, is going to be about $147. And it was kind of like, that doesn't really mean much to me, right? That's not even a good Friday night out. But I said, this is not your retirement plan. It's written as a retirement plan, but I don't want you to rely on it. And if all goes well, this will be your bass boat, or this will be your fifth wheel camper, or something like that. And so it's done real well in the 11 years now. The stock price is just a shade under $200 a share, and we've got people in our business with values that have been here the whole time, with values between $1 and $300,000 in their ESOP account. So really cool. One of the guys texted me a couple of years ago, and he said, "This thing's going well. I'm going to have to plan on a bigger boat."
That's
I use
awesome.
that bass boat. So um, really, I think it's a really good way for someone to succeed out of their business. And so separating that ownership transition from the management transition was a really important thing to me, because if you do them both at once, it's just a lot. And separating that and having another 10, 12 years for myself to be in the business and manage the business, to get the succession the way we want it, really was an important thing to me. So, and that's the point we're at now. We're 11, 12 years later. And I think, as you know, Eric Ritchie, who's our chief operating officer, will become president on May 9th. So that's going to leave me with this lonely CEO role.
Nice. I think you might be able to find something to do inside the business.
My big deal
There's a lot.
is leadership. So continuing to build the leadership pipeline, because we always are going to need that. And so that's kind of where I'm focused. I'm focused on, we have a workforce advancement group that kind of works superintendent level down, but we don't have any formal training above that level outside of what we send people out to seminars. So that's a big piece of what I want to start developing, is getting that leadership pipeline. So when we have to move somebody up, they're ready.
There's a great book that I've recently read. It's called The Motive by Patrick Lencioni. Have you heard of him before?
I've heard of him. I've not heard of that book.
It's for what you're going on and what you're about to do within less than a month here. It's a perfect book for you. You'll love it. You're already the right person, but it's going to help you understand and explain your role and your desire and what you're trying to do by building your leadership team in
Yep.
a great way. Now, here's the good thing. I do read a lot, but I'm not a fast reader. But I read this book in 2 days, one like less than 2.5 hours. It was of total reading. So it's the perfect kind of book. You'll love it. It's good.
Yeah.
It's a story. It's his writing style too. He basically tells like a fable and a story, and then the
Yep.
concepts behind it. It's fantastic. But it's called The Motive. Um,
I will pick up a
Buy
copy.
it and read it.
Yep.
You'll send me a message and a text. I'm confident you'll be like, man, that was awesome. Thank you. It's perfect for
Yeah.
what you're about to do. It
Thank you.
couldn't be better timing.
Back to the employee benefit. We just wrapped up meetings. So every spring, we try to have meetings with all our employees. So it's 5 different meetings with about 80 to 100 people in each room. So it's a big road show we go on. But it was just so gratifying to see the people, the faces, and go. And I've got their report. They don't have it yet, but I know how much their ESOP is worth. And to look at somebody and go, wow, he's 34 years old and he's got $200,000 in his ESOP account, and he's got such a runway ahead of him. Um, that and just watching them, I think they're starting to get it that owning the company is one thing, but having ownership in the company is something altogether different. And so we talked about that with them. Like, you can own a car and run it into the ground, but taking ownership in the car means you have the oil changes done, you keep it clean, vacuum it out, right? You do all the maintenance that's needed. So we're expanding that employee owner thing. Now let's talk about employee ownership. And we're just seeing such great results from people, actually going out of their way to go, hey, something as simple as there's a chain laying on the ground. That'll cost $75 to replace. And if we don't pick it up now, it's going to get probably buried by a bulldozer. So let's pick that up. That's my chain.
I love that. I
Yeah.
love that. And you know what? That concept is great for all of life because you're either making deposits in yourself or you're taking
Yeah.
withdrawals in every single action you do. Um, the adage of, how you do one thing is how you do everything is really critical. And I think the faster people grasp that concept, the more you realize it. The concept being everything you do is either helping you improve or you're actually moving backwards. There's no
Yeah.
in between. Every little decision, food you eat, whether you pick something up, do you walk right by it? Do you own it? Are you owning your own being? And it's critical.
Yeah. It's, if you're if you're staying level, it's like in our business for years, we did the same volume for 8, 10 years. But were we the same size business? We weren't, because there's inflation that takes place, right? So when you stay the same, you're actually, as you mentioned, you're actually going behind because other people are advancing, whether they're advancing as individuals or as companies or whatever. So it's a really cool thing. I'll be a little vulnerable here. I had no idea what a CEO was. I mean, I literally started working in this business when I was 16 years old in the trench, and there was never any. I flunked out of college, and then there was never any real education, formal education. It's all been, trial by fire. And I mentioned being in survival mode for so many years. But more recently, about 2 years ago, I started coaching with a guy named Alex Judd from a company called Path for Growth. And this guy's half my age, but to me, the growth I've undertaken or I've experienced in the last 2 years since working with him, and part of it was just, him convincing me that I'm a CEO, not a ditch digger still, not a glorified ditch digger. No, you're the CEO. And I think as guys and girls get in this business, they tend to find themselves in a spot that they can't get out of. I see that a lot. That was me for a long time. And so coming to that realization, convincing myself that I was a chief executive officer and not a glorified ditch digger, was an important aspect to my growth.
Yeah, it's a key piece too to be successful CEO, having that awareness and conceptualization of exactly what that role is. And it's not what you think it is if you just start in the trenches and keep going. You just sort of you don't really figure it out until someone sort of clicks the light on for you and says, "Hey, it's not about that anymore." You got
Yeah, it's
all these
not,
field folks doing that stuff. Yeah.
for me, it's not about, and I never was a micromanager. I mean, we had 400 employees, and I had a COO, and I never micromanaged him, but I was always really interested in the work because I'm interested in the employees. And I told them that when we were at a meeting, I said, "There's no way I can know every single one of you guys. I can tell you, there's love in my heart for every single one of you guys. There's, it's there, and I want the best things for you." But it's hard for me to. I can lose the altitude, right, and go back and get in the grass, but I need to try to stay up out of it, and that's part of what this transition of the president role from me to Eric is. In one way, it's already respecting what he's already doing, because I've been kind of offloading things onto him. So, but it's also me understanding better what my role is in the company. So for me, it's the vision, it's the future, it's strategic planning, it's the leadership succession planning, training, that sort of stuff. And so my job is to try to make us as evergreen as we can,
I love it. I love it. All right, I want to go
whatever that
through
really means.
I want to go through one more transition with you on another topic. We
Okay.
talk a lot about stigmas in construction. You and I have picked a lot of them. You're no good at money. You can't figure out how to sell. Price is the only thing that matters. Some negative, some positive. Some, quite frankly, are earned and some aren't.
Yep.
Of those stigmas and of your time, and you've been so cool to share some of failures and successes. What do you think are the key traits that someone needs to have or are required in order for them to be successful in construction?
So a lot of people would disagree with me. I think probably the first one is humility. And to be honest with you, I struggle with that some. I always have. But, because I think to be successful in construction, you need people right there with you. You need people to to bring ideas ahead. You need people to take initiative. And because you can't do it all as a business owner. And if you don't have the humility to give up that initiative and give up that creativity to the other people working for you, then I think you're boxed in at that point in time. Um, so I think humility is one of them. Um, Motivation is obviously a key, but I'll be honest with you, and people laugh when I say this. I'm not particularly self-motivated. What motivates me is having people around me that I know I don't want to let down. And so when I started business, there was one guy that I'd worked with a few years, and we got along really well. And and so he was my first phone call. I said, his name's Kevin Gordon. And I said, I need you to come to work with me. And I didn't tell him why at the time, but the reason I needed to is because I knew he would push me harder than I would push myself. So I think you have to know yourself. I think you have to be self-aware of what your strengths and weaknesses are. And that, I mean, that really is humility too, but motivation and then your values. I think I never thought much about the values. The only thing that I said to myself, I can remember before I started business, I was a project manager on a big project in northern Maine, and I had a contract that was supposed to be in Monday to put a footing in for a building. So we dug it out Monday morning, and they didn't show up. It rained overnight. We had to redig the hole. And I just said to myself, a guy could probably do okay in this business if he just did what he said he was going to do.
It's so true, man.
Right? I mean, that
So true. Goes for any business.
and that was the value I brought when I started business. And the first job I got, um, I bid probably 15 jobs and I didn't get any. It was 1992. The economy was terrible. There was no such thing as the internet. Uh, I put an ad in the paper before I had work, and I had like 300 applications. And um, so I finally bid this job, this bigger job. It was for a new Walmart, way bigger than anything I thought I'd be biting off to begin with. But I reasoned that I had some uh, advantage there because I didn't have any overhead to speak of. I just had me, and I could live for a little while without even a paycheck. So I knew I had an advantage against is actually my former company, my former family business, that was my competitor on it. And I went down, and the project manager for the GC said, "Okay, so you're our apparent low bidder, but I want to talk to you. Like, how many people do you have?" And I said, "No, I don't have any people right now." He said, "How much equipment do you have?" And I said, "Right now, I don't have any." And I had said, "I've got some people ready to come to work when we get some work." How much equipment do you have? Well, I don't have any, but I've got the equipment lined up, ready to go to work. And he said, "You don't have any equipment, you don't have any people. Why would I hire you to do this job?" And I said, "Because if you hire me, you won't have to lay awake at night and worry about it because that's going to be my job." And that's what sold him.
Yeah.
I
He
mean,
gave you a
they hired
shot.
me to do the job. I was 28 years old. Um, but I think he knew that I was going to make sure that if the job didn't fail, it certainly wasn't going to be because of me. We were going to push it. And I think that mindset is that we're going to win in the field and bring value we're all going to win together. That mindset is to me critical for us. Critical for us.
You know what I want to point out about your answer that's so important, and I don't know if I want people to catch this. He asked you a question, and you answered everything about how you were going to serve them.
Yeah.
Nothing about you. Because I'm the best. Nope, you didn't say that. Because I have all this experience. Nope, you didn't say that. You said because you're going to not lay awake at night worrying about this job because I'm gonna. You took the burden off of them. That
Yeah.
is the key. And if you focus just on how you're going to help and serve your customer, your employees, that's the common theme with everything you've said. And, look, by all means, I think in the construction world, certainly, you have a very successful company. There's 475 employees. You do lots of great work. You have a succession plan. You have great leadership. You've had a financial exit in an ESOP, and you're still going and having fun. And you're even now a marketing expert. And it's probably because you've never tried to do it for you. You know what I mean? Somewhere
Well,
you
that
learned a
could be
long
true.
time ago.
I had a great role model in my grandfather that was, he was in business and he loved equipment. And he went to the Con Expo, I think the first one was like 1937 or 1939, and he went to every single one till 2003. He was 96 years old the last time I took him. And but he loved equipment, but he also loved people more. And he knew that it didn't matter what he had for equipment. If he didn't have the best people in it, that it was destined for mediocrity. So, just that his mindset around people is one thing that I really appreciate. Number one, but I try to model the best I can, and it's not that I have to model it in a false way. It's authentic for me to try to model it that way because like I said, when I talk to our folks, they're like, I have love in my heart for you. I have love in my heart for how your family is, and I can't know everyone's kids' names, right? But I want them to have the resources they need to have margins of safety, just like I need margins of safety for resilience in our business. I need a margins of safety for my relationships, with my kids, with my wife, with my brothers and sisters. And understanding, you talked about making deposits. So it's that margin of safety that you earn is by making deposits in those various areas of your life. That so when we have to come home late from work on a Tuesday, your wife doesn't say, "Well, you're late every freaking day."
Right.
It's Okay, I understand, right? It's a much easier conversation. I understand. If I build that up with my wife when she usually cooks dinner and I do the dishes, and I'm happy doing it. So I mean, we're partners in that. So, and then from a financial standpoint, I need to maintain my own personal margin of safety around finances, but so don't our people. So we're trying to train them how to do that sort of stuff, and make them aware that I think so many people come in the world and they don't even know there's such a thing as a margin of safety. What's
True.
been modeled for them is dancing on the edge, and that's just the way life is. And so for us, it's really, let's just take a few steps back from the edge. And that way, if we've got a little bit of a problem, a little hiccup, it becomes just a problem, something we have to manage versus a crisis that puts us into tailspin. So that's what we're trying to do.
I love it, man. I love it. Well, Herb, this has been an awesome time, man, catching up and you telling these stories. I could talk to you for hours, but I know we are running up on your clock and time. So
Yeah.
look, I got a couple quick ones for you though
All
that we'd
right.
like to play. This is all construction related. These are 5 quick questions, and
Okay.
you give me the answer that comes to mind first. All right. What's the best advice you've ever received on a construction site?
Show up with your boots tied.
Nice. What's
I
your
mean, show
go-to?
up, in other words, show up the right way. Show up
That's right.
ready to go to work.
Ready to go. What's your best advice? What's your best safety advice for new folks to the construction world?
Uh, Understand you don't know a stinking thing, and take 5 seconds before you make every decision. Take 5 seconds and just question yourself whether it's the right thing.
Yeah, just think. I love that. All right, pick one. You got a skyscraper, a bridge, or a tunnel?
Boy, I have good memories of tunnels. Stick with that one.
That's a good
Back in
one.
the 80s, we were over in Europe and we were for a heavy equipment tour, and we actually were going up in the Alps and came to a tunnel that the doors closed to a certain degree because based on weather. And so we literally had to get out and take the mirrors off the bus so he could fit in between the doors.
I love
It
it.
was a really cool tunnel.
What's the most underrated skill in construction?
Most underrated skill in the construction, I would say um, knowledge transfer.
Love it. Some might call that wisdom.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yep.
Well, Herb, how can people find you? You're on LinkedIn, right? I'm
Yep.
going to
On
put
LinkedIn.
your contact in the show notes. Any other ways to contact you, work with you?
Well,
People, if general contractors are looking at this, the owners, developers, and they're like, man, I'm going to hire that guy. Like, how do
yeah.
they find you?
So sargent.us is our website. And I'm also on Instagram, herb.sargent. But you'll see that I've got almost no activity there. So
So
I
find you
tend
on
to
LinkedIn
focus
and your
more on
website.
LinkedIn. Facebook I'm on, but it's nothing I'm proud of.
Nice.
Not that
Well,
not that there's any incendiary things there, but I
right.
just don't do much on there.
Well, I think folks that listening to you now should go to LinkedIn first, and then your website, and then move to Facebook and Instagram. There's the cadence.
I think LinkedIn, though, if they want to know what I stand for and what I represent, LinkedIn's a pretty good platform for that.
I love it. I love it. All right. Well, Herb, thank you very much for taking the time to join, man. I really appreciate you doing the show. I appreciate
Yeah,
all the advice and wisdom you shared. And I'm excited to see and keep in touch with you. I'm going to see you soon coming
yeah.
up here, and we'll be connected.
Likewise, these podcasts. I've listened to a number of the podcasts you're doing, Scott, and I realize this takes time and money to do these things, and it's kind of a freebie, right? You're throwing out there for everybody. So I just want to thank you for what you're doing, and because there's so many people that can benefit from all these guests that you have on. Just so much wisdom that comes uh, through the airwaves on this podcast. So it's really a great podcast, and I appreciate it.
Well, Herb, I appreciate you saying that. Thank you very much. That is our goal. Mission is to just put people in touch with advice, information, people that they wouldn't otherwise be able to see and hear. And then it all stemmed when COVID hit. When we started this the first time, was I was just trying to get people access to folks that I know personally, or I could get on accountants, bankers, what do we do? Oh my gosh. And now we've just kind of pivoted that now 4 years later to, okay, here's the top things that people want to know. Let me see who I can bring on to talk about it. And so I really appreciate you saying that. Thank you.
Also your business, it's a really unique, to me, it's a really unique approach. I've never seen anything like it in the construction industry, and I've been around quite a while. And I think back now into, 1991 or two, when I needed $300,000 line of credit, and being able to sit down with somebody and go through cash flow projections and all that sort of stuff. So a great value in that respect too.
Thank you, man. I appreciate you saying that. Thanks. It means a lot. Well, everybody, obviously you can see why I had Herb on. He's a gentleman and a scholar in the construction world. I suggest you link up with him on LinkedIn. If you found value in this, which I don't see how you couldn't have, please share this episode, share this show with some friends, connect with both Herb and I. And until next time, I wish you guys a great week, and may God bless you.